Good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar. On behalf of our General President, Brother Dr. Willis Lanzer, welcome. I am Brother Dr. Jeffrey Sterling, the Surgeon General for Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. And yes, I already know what you're thinking. It is hotter than July, and it's probably been that way since March. So we'll take that one for being a little bit late getting to you. But in any event, we want you to think about the fact that actually almost 1,600 people died in the United States from heat-related illnesses just last year. So the risk is very real. And that's just about 20 people per day during the 90 days of summer. Today, we're going to discuss what you need to know to avoid being part of the statistic of heat-related injuries, deaths, and pool-related injuries and deaths. Pay particular attention if you live in places with especially high humidity and higher rates of heat deaths such as Chicago, New Orleans, Miami, and Houston. There are warnings and signs which we'll be discussing. We'll talk about heat stress, we'll talk about heat exhaustion, both of which come before heat stroke, which is a life-threatening emergency. Stay tuned, I think you'll find this very interesting. Please forward your questions, we'll be answering them over the course of the evening. We would like to welcome back tonight as our moderator for this panel, Alpha Phi Alpha's Deputy Surgeon General for Family Health. Brother Dr. Victor Narcisse III is a spring 1990 initiate of the Rho Iota chapter of Alpha and is currently active in Alpha Eta Lambda chapter. He practices at the Houston Methodist Hospital as the Associate Division Head of Hospital Medicine and is the Director of Clinical Research in the Division of Hospital Medicine. He is board certified in internal medicine and geriatric medicine and is a fellow of the American College of Physicians and the Society of Hospital Medicine. Brother Dr. Narcisse, have a great show. I'll be talking to you again at the end.
Good evening. I wanted to bring this topic to attention because I'm from New Orleans. I live in Houston, and it is hot. Very rarely do I get in my car if it's been out in the sun and it's less than 100 degrees on the monitor. So it's very, very dangerous. I wanted to really delve into the topic and try to find out ways to understand what to do and how to stay safe. Helping me tonight, I have a couple of outstanding individuals. First is Dr. Fred Earl Kinsey Jr. Dr. Kinsey is board certified in emergency medicine after training in the University of South Alabama College of Medicine. He did his internship at the Naval Medical Center in San Diego, his residency at the University of Mississippi Medical Center. He's a veteran of the United States Navy. I bet he's seen Maverick at least once yet.
And been working too hard. I definitely will. The new one.
His tour of duty included Africa, Europe, Guam, and currently works in academic community medicine in Jackson, Mississippi. And I have the honor to bring him to the fore. Additionally, I'd like to also bring Brother David Tyson to the front. He's the founder and CEO, president of Sales Track. He's had 16 years of sales experience, HR assessment, consultation. He's a highly sought speaker by everyone from entrepreneurs to mid-sized companies to Fortune 500 companies all across the United States. And he's got a business experience, and he's going to bring a practicality of being a homeowner with a pool and some of the day-to-day things that I think can be quite helpful. So I wanted to thank in advance both of them for coming to assist.
Thank you for having us.
Brother Kinsey, I'd like
looking forward to it.
Start with you, and I kind of wanted to get a sense of the kinds of problems that you see walking into your emergency room. What kinds of symptoms do people have after they've been out in the heat?
So in the emergency room, heat injuries, especially in the summer, kind of what we call the 100 days of summer from Labor Day, Memorial Day, or Memorial Day to Labor Day, they're vast. So in the ER or in life, there's 4 what we consider heat injuries. And they start from very basic to, very emergent. This person could die. So the first one that we normally see, and is probably the most common one that will happen, is called a heat rash. That means that you're just outside, you're in the heat, lots of sweating, usually involves having excessive clothes on, and you'll usually just see some red cluster of bumps, some blisters, usually on your neck, around your groin, around places that just hold heat and hold moisture a lot easier. That's the most simplest one we see, and that's usually just, it's gonna get better with time. Get out of the heat. We teach people about the appropriate clothes to wear. Light colors, alternating out of the heat as much as possible. And that's kind of the most basic heat injury that we have, and that's usually seen like in our express care type of area. Usually just seen by one of our mid-level providers, very in and out. The next one we start to see becomes a little bit more serious is when we start seeing patients with heat cramps, and these are people who are usually doing a little bit more strenuous of work. That's going to be our outside workers doing construction, doing brick masonry, doing outside things that are outside during the very hot times of the summer. And there are going to be people who, during their exertion, they're losing a lot of salt, they're losing a lot of moisture. And when that happens, muscles can start to spasm, they can start to cramp, and it can become very painful. And this can happen in a very short period of time. A lot of people think that I'm not going to get heat cramps as long as I don't stay out here for hours. But people can develop heat cramps within minutes. I mean, literally, I've had patients, especially our elderly patients, patients who have diabetes, who are just more prone to become dehydrated. I've seen people start to develop heat cramps within 15, 20 minutes of being outside in the heat, especially in the heat like we're having now, where the temperatures are reaching, 100 degrees, 102 degrees in some places. So it's very, very important that you hydrate, that you alternate working in cool spaces and hot spaces, and that you drink plenty of electrolytes and sugars. But that into itself rarely gets admitted to the hospital. This is usually a get them rehydrated, give them some fluids, watch them, observe them, and usually these patients do fine and go home. So it's very rare that these patients will actually go beyond an emergency room. The next one, and the one that becomes a little bit more serious, or a lot more serious, is when we delve into what's called heat exhaustion. And that's when the body starts to lose an excessive amount of water and an excessive amount of salt, to the point where you're starting to get very thirsty. Your mouth starts to get very dry. The person is usually perspiring tremendously. They're just pouring sweat. And these are usually our elderly people, and these are usually our diabetics, and these are usually our people who work outside a lot, especially people who have just started the work of being outside. So that person who just got their first job doing roofing, that person who just got their first job doing some type of summer contract work, construction work. These are the ones who we typically see in this fall in this type of realm. So sometimes our athletes who aren't hydrating like they're supposed to, or had a little bit too fun the night before and got dehydrated with their activities, our firefighters, our farmers. These are the kind of people who we're seeing in the heat exhaustion realm. And what they're seeing is that they start to develop headaches. They get nauseated. You see them vomit. You'll see their temperature start to increase. You'll notice that they haven't urinated all day. They've been at work from 8 o'clock in the morning until now it's lunchtime, and they're not urinating. And they're telling you that, oh, I don't feel well. I'm getting dizzy. I'm getting nauseated. Those people are starting to develop symptoms of what we call heat exhaustion. It's more serious. Those people need to be removed from their hot area. They need to take off all the excessive clothing, because that's the number one thing we see, is that they're trying to cover their skin because the sun is just so hot. But the covering of the skin is also preventing their body from doing the natural process of expelling heat. Our biggest expeller of heat in our body is our skin. Those vessels right above the skin or right below the skin start to dilate, they get bigger, more blood can get through those vessels, and that's how heat gets dissipated. If you cover that skin up from literally neck gaiter all the way down to big boots, then your body has lost its ability to really remove that heat. Now it's trapped in the body, temperature of the body starts to increase, and you start to become more susceptible to these type of heat injuries. The big one that we talk about the most from an emergency standpoint, because this is our biggest medical emergency, is called a heat stroke. And the word stroke is technically a misnomer. So in the world of stroke, for an emergency medicine physician and for most physicians, when we talk about stroke, we think about a blood vessel that gets blocked, whether it be by a blood clot or by a cholesterol plaque, and then everything down from that gets no blood flow. And so you get a stroke and you lose your ability to talk or walk or feel things. That's what a doctor thinks of stroke. But for a heat stroke, it's a little bit different. A heat stroke is when you've gone past heat cramps, you've gone past heat exhaustion, and now your body effectively cannot cool itself down anymore. And so there's this rapid progression of heat within the body. You no longer, your ability to sweat gets shut down. So these people actually they come in very hot, but they're not sweating. They're dry. Their clothes may be wet, but if you actually touch them, they're usually very dry. Their temperatures can be anywhere from 104 to 105 to 106. I've seen people with temperatures of 106 before. Um, when they come in, they're usually very confused. They're incoherent. They don't really make sense. They've usually been found by somebody, but they're not someone who's going to walk up to our front desk and check themselves in. There's someone who was found in a car. They were found outside. They were found unresponsive, found in a hot house in Mississippi in the Delta, the northern portion of our state. We have a huge poverty area, huge poverty issue. And there's lots of people that don't have air conditioners. I know it's hard to think about in some parts of the country where you all stay, to live in a place where temperatures reach 101 degrees outside and people don't have air conditioners, but that's a real reality in some of our parts. And there are people who are found in their homes in the middle of the day, who have developed heat stroke symptoms. So they're confused, they're having slurred speech, they're comatose, their skin is dry. And if this isn't treated aggressively and quickly, these people can die. And so, just like with heat cramps, call 911, get them to a cool location. With this one, you want to actually wet the skin. It is okay to pour water on someone who is confused, hot, and having a heat stroke because their body has effectively lost the ability to cool itself, to produce sweat. So you have to, or we have to, do this for them. What we'll also do is that we'll go down to our environmental services area and we'll get the biggest fans they have downstairs because not only do we want to get them wet, but we want to circulate cool air around them because now that their body can't do the work, we have to effectively do it for them. Another thing that you could do as a person who is seeing someone with a heat injury, if you have ice available in any location, you can put ice packs on the patient, putting ice packs on their neck, putting ice packs under their armpits, putting ice packs in their groins. That's what's going to happen as soon as they get to the hospital. So the sooner that can happen in the field or in the location where the patient's having the actual problem, the more likely we are to get this patient back to a normal temperature quickly. The thing about heat strokes too is that what will happen is our body is made of just a bunch of proteins, right? Proteins in your muscles, your brain is just protein tissue. It's just proteins. When proteins become too hot, they break down. So you think about that. My muscles are breaking down. My brain is breaking down. My kidneys are breaking down. You can actually go into multi-organ failure because of elevated temperature. And then these people, if not treated appropriately, can die. Some people who survive heat strokes can have permanent damage, whether it be neurological permanent damage in a vegetative state, whether it be permanent heart damage from heart failure, whether it be kidney damage that's permanent, can end up on dialysis for the rest of their lives. So these things are very important, and these can happen to very young people. You're talking about life consequences for a 17-year-old for 24-year-olds, for 34-year-olds. So these aren't just happening to our elderly patients; they're happening to anyone that doesn't take the precautions to take care of themselves.
Thanks for I, as a geriatrician, I worry about my older patients, especially during the heat. Do they have access to air conditioning? Do they have access to fluids? But you mentioned cars and infants. We all in Texas and Louisiana, we would always hear of folks who got left in a car and then ended up having an injury. Is that the kind of thing you see in your practice?
We do. And statistically, there's about probably 40 children that die every year because of heat strokes being left inside of the vehicle. That number fluctuates up and down. Usually, if we have a lot one year because of national exposure, people are a little bit more hyper vigilant about it. You may see a decrease the next year, but then it quickly uptrends right behind it when the hypervigilant kind of goes down. But yes, we do see heat injuries and issues with children being left in cars. And I tell parents, especially young parents, it can happen so quickly. At temperatures that we have here in our state, reaching 99 degrees in the daytime, a car without air conditioning, even sometimes with air conditioning, because when a car is left sealed, air conditioning does not work the same way it does when it's moving. It's because of the RPMs of the engine. It does not produce the same amount of cold air. You'll notice that if you sit in the car for a long time, the AC just doesn't feel the same as it did when you were driving. So within 10 to 15 minutes of being in a car with no air conditioning, sitting in a car, children can have fatal heat injuries.
Very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. We try to recommend to people some ideas of things that they could potentially do to stay out of trouble. Throughout this journey, many of you have heard my story of my exercise with my cycling, and during the middle of the day, I just can't do it. It's really something that I try to avoid being outside in the heat of the day, and I really try to put my outside activities either earlier in the morning or much later into the evening. Other things like working shorter shifts, trying to stay hydrated, watching other people to make sure that they are not having the signs and symptoms that Mother Kinsey discussed is so important.
Yeah, big time. And I tell people too, know your limitations. If you're just starting a fitness journey, it's probably not the best idea to put on a sauna suit and go and walk 2 miles or even a mile in 95-degree weather. And we see it all the time. I can't tell you how many times we've been in the ER and somebody comes rolling through and you can see the sauna suit or the garbage bag is what I call it that's been cut off of them because they were out, they decided they were going to start losing some weight or start getting healthy, which we definitely advocate for. We want everyone to be as healthy as possible. But know the limitation that not getting out and walking, 2 hours or an hour or even 30 minutes in 100-degree weather in a garbage bag is probably not the best decision. And then hydration. Pre-activity hydration is super important. The more hydrated you are before you get outside, the better you are. The more likely your body is to effectively auto-regulate your temperature.
We preach a thing called heat acclimatization, and the idea that if you gradually increase the amount of work exercise you do outside, that can be potentially helpful. But that's one of those things that's a very transient kind of a benefit, because if you don't do that for just a short period of time, a couple of weeks, not even a whole month, you can essentially lose all the heat acclimatization that you've achieved. And again, it's very, very dangerous to do that in the South, where the temperature is very, very hot and it's very, very humid. So we worry a great deal about this. Brother Kinsey, I've often been told that if somebody's really having a heat stroke, maybe that's not the best time to give them a lot of fluids. You want them to hydrate, but once they're starting to have a lot of trouble and they're getting dizzy, maybe trying to put more water and more Gatorade down their throat. Can that ever be a problem?
Correct. We tell patients all the time, even when I speak to kids about heat safety and different mentoring courses that we have, or adults, if you think they're having a heat stroke, which means that they're having some type of confusion, then don't put anything in their mouth. Okay, I tell that for my patients who are actually having real strokes, their family members, when I'm teaching, like what to look for on a stroke. If a person is confused, if a person can't answer your questions, don't put anything in their mouth because it may not go down the right hole. Okay, because there's two holes back there. One only should have air and one has food and water. And so we don't want anything going down the wrong hole. The best thing you can do, if you think a person is having a heat-related injury, if they can talk to you, if they can answer your questions appropriately, giving them small sips of water is fine. If they can't talk to you, if they can't answer your questions appropriately, don't put anything in their mouth. Your only goal is to try to put ice packs on that neck, in those armpits, in that groin, to get those clothes off, those extra layers off, and to get them to a cool location until EMS arrives.
Does it matter if when you're in the early phases of this and you're trying to prevent these injuries, does it matter if you're drinking cold water or warm water or a sports drink? Do any of those things matter?
Having sports drinks is good because they will usually have sodium, potassium, magnesium, some sugars in them, and those are all things that your body needs for to be effective. Whether the temperature of the fluid is cold or hot, your as soon as it hits your stomach, your body is going to naturally take that temperature down pretty quickly. And so, preferably, I tell people, yes, drink cool water because you'll at least get some very temporary benefit of the cooling effects of the water. It makes you feel better. But if it, does it truly physically or physiologically make a huge difference, I'm not sure.
I've got school-age kids, and we worry about their sports activities outside. Are there policies or ideas that you want their schools or their sports teams to follow in terms of preventing sports injury and heat injury?
Definitely. We talk about this a lot as well. I have friends who are sports medicine fellows and sports medicine physicians who we have these conversations during the summer times. It kind of starts from the beginning. It's the pre-hydration, making sure that before you go out to do your football practice, summer camp, band camp, people forget about that one. Before you go out to a very hot environment, pre-hydration, drinking as much water, as much sugar, as much salt, as much magnesium, getting those electrolytes to the highest of their ability first is important, the pre-hydration. Once you actually get to the point of working out, light colored clothes is important because darks absorb light more. Less is more when it comes to clothing. So you want to try to cover as less location as possible so that your body can dissipate this heat as best as possible. Having scheduled breaks during practice, that means that you're practicing no more than about 15 minutes without some type of physical break and a water break. So having lots of available liquids outside for people to drink is very important. And then having a medical plan, meaning that if a child shows this, we do this, is very important. And you can always reach out to your local sports medicine facilities, whether it be a orthopedic doctor's office, whether it be a emergency room, whether it be a primary care family medicine doctor who does sports medicine. Reach out to them and you can go online to the CDC and find these types of plans. That if a kid shows that he's having heat cramps, this is my plan. If a kid shows that he's doing this, this is my plan. And then if you can, obviously have some type of athletic trainers available that know the signs of heat injuries and can actively start the process of getting these people back to normal as quick as possible. Because the faster you act in the field, the more likely you are to prevent the escalation of heat injuries to the point of having heat strokes.
One of the things I've seen a lot growing up is that coaches would use water breaks and hydration as a reward, or if you weren't doing the things you needed to do in practice, a penalty. Are those kinds of things ever acceptable?
Never, never. The water break should always be scheduled. It is very important that these kids get water breaks, and usually the longer they go without the water breaks, their performance will start to drop. So if you want them to be a better performer, you got to keep them hydrated. You got to keep their temperatures normal, and you got to keep them healthy.
Excellent, excellent. We worry about the athletes in particular. I always worry about my bigger athletes. They have more mass compared to the amount of surface area that they have to sort of get rid of all this heat. And so, and I've always noticed that it's the big football players that end up having trouble when you see, one of the professional sports players or college, high school level folks. It tends to be the bigger ones, and so those are the ones that I've always paid attention to. Is there any validity to that?
Very much so. Very much so. So we know from a anatomical and physiological standpoint that the more body fat a person has, it is harder for them to cool themselves. Okay. So like I mentioned earlier, the way the body cools itself is through the vessels that are closest to the top of the skin actually dilating, becoming bigger, so that more blood can pass through those vessels. And the more blood that passes through those vessels on the outer portion of the skin, then that heat kind of just gets transferred out of the body. So the bigger a person is, you would think that a fat person is bigger, so they have more body mass. But the reality is that they're very small vessels that carry blood from the actual inside of the body to the skin. And so the longer a vessel is, a skinny long vessel, it actually takes blood much longer to get there. Okay. So you got this skinny long vessel taking blood from in the body to the outside skin. It's harder to cool a person who has more fat tissue. Because fat, by definition, is made to store heat, not to store energy, and not to dissipate it, not to get rid of it. It's good for the winter, not for the summer.
The athletic store, they're always trying to push clothing, and they say that this fabric will ventilate better than this other fabric, and that's important in heat. Do you find that traditional fabrics like cottons and wools are any better or worse than these newer fabrics that sort of let the sweat go through the fabric?
Yeah, the newer fabrics definitely have validity in how they work. Most of them are some type of polyester or some type of synthetic material that essentially whisks water away from the skin. So it gets the skin, it gets the moisture off the skin, and it actually has some type of fibers that actually can cool the material as opposed to cotton and wool, which just absorb water, but it just lays on top of the skin, actually making the material that you're wearing more heavy, and making you exert more energy by carrying all that extra weight essentially of water. But the newer material, from different companies, actually have been shown to have some superiority when it comes to moisture wicking and keeping people cool when it's hot outside.
Similar idea to what you touched on before about wearing a hat. You talked about lots of clothing to keep the heat away. What about a hat with a big wide brim? Is that something that's helpful because of the sun, or is that something that's going to keep the heat closer to your body?
So hats have it's kind of a two-way issue. So your head, your scalp is a very big area of skin, and it's the highest portion of your body. Heat rises, and so your head is a location where heat can actually come out really quickly and easily. So it's really dependent on the type of hat that you have on. You do want a hat with a brim or some type of area around it, because it does provide heat for not just your face, but actually other parts of your body. But once your body is overheated, um, that head where that heat comes out of, if it's blocked, it becomes an issue. Especially if that hat is made from like a cotton or some type of wool or some type of non easily heat dissipating material. Like if it's a straw hat, or some of the hats that are made specifically for working outside, those are usually pretty good because they allow heat to go out, but they block the UV rays from coming in and actually adding to your temperature. So the right hat is the kind of the right answer, I guess you would say.
Excellent. Uh, One of the ways that folks in my area of the country really enjoy trying to cool themselves off is with a pool. And I'm going to start this question with Brother Kinsey, and then I'd like to take it to Brother Tyson. Is there any benefit if somebody is showing signs of this heat injury of putting them in the water and trying to immerse them?
If someone is, the answer is, I would say no. Especially if you're at a point where you're having a heat stroke. So any person that's comatose, not responding, not answering questions appropriately, you don't want to put them in a pool where they actually risk their safety, right? Otherwise, people who are actually just having heat cramps or having heat exhaustion, the biggest thing is getting them hydrated, and the next thing is getting them cool in a cool location. So getting them out of the sun. You do have some pools that are completely covered and they don't have any sun exposure, but getting them out of the sun is actually the biggest answer. So getting them out of the exposure of heat and then getting them hydrated. But the pools definitely have some benefit when it comes to cooling people, but not someone who I think is already in the phases of heat injury.
Brother Tyson, can you give me a sense of what are the kinds of things that you'd want somebody to know about having a pool, about being around pools to keep their family safe?
Certainly. Brothers, thank you for this opportunity. I have some experiences not only as a pool owner, but as a young person, as a young adult. I was a lifeguard, so I would say back in the day. So I've experienced water in several different fashions. I learned to swim, and I too am from Louisiana, so I understand what that heat is like, especially in the southern states. So I learned to swim in a swimming pool, but I really became a great swimmer in a lake, and that's where I became a Boy Scouts of America lifeguard. So I would say when we start talking about pool safety and we talk about the hindrances of being skilled in water and in water safety, those are very important points. I know you mentioned the heat that's associated with it, and of course, pools and water, they are attractive to young kids in particular because of the heat, the environments that we live in. And so water safety is extremely important. So as a pool owner now for 25 years, it's been very important, that we keep the pool up to safety par by keeping the water clean, by keeping it properly chlorinated, things along those lines. There are some other obstacles that people sometimes forget about in terms of pool safety, and that is a pool in your backyard. You should make sure that you have a gate that closes automatically without you having to push that gate closed, because in fact, in certain areas, particularly in Dallas County, it is a requirement that you have a gate that actually closes automatically as well. So there are always kids that are lurking around to look for opportunities to get in home pools, even that may even include climbing your fence. So those are some things that we can talk about.
You mentioned that you served as a lifeguard. Are there water competencies that you'd want young children to have so that they don't get into trouble in pools?
Certainly, and those competencies are inclusive not only of pools but open waters as well. Just remember, I mentioned lakes and beaches. I've seen a lot of Facebook posts of over the 4th of July weekend where people were at their beach, or they were at a lake. But certain competencies. So every person, in particular children, should know how to swim, including how to help other people, so others that they may be swimming with. So as an example, you should really know how to enter the water safely. You should be competent in being able to swim in water that may be over your head. You should be able to do various strokes. You should be able to flip around. You should be able to tread in the water for at least a minute, and then comfortably, get out of the water safely. Those are things that certainly should be a part of the competencies associated with it. Something that's not created, but I've seen it all over, the buddy system. You should never swim alone. And you should always have a watcher. And that watcher doesn't necessarily have to be a lifeguard, but that should be a competent adult, and that's 18 years of age or older, and they should not be distracted, by the cell phone or reading a book, things along those lines. So if we keep those things in place, we have a much better situation where people will not drown or find themselves in water safety situations where you will need to call emergency services and have to administer CPR. But I would say one of the best things that can happen for anyone, and particularly young children, of course, is to learn how to swim and to understand the rules of safe swimming.
It seems like a high bar to ask an adult to sit by the pool and watch the kids and not get into the phone, not in a book, not talking to their friends, not having some adult beverages. I see, in my experience, most of the times, the adults are surrounding the pool, but no one's really watching. Is that something that you think it would be a problem?
It's definitely a problem if they're not watching, because there have been reports in Dallas County in particular, and I'm sure across the country, where there have been parents watching. And there's an apartment complex within probably 3 miles of my house last year where a child drowned because the parent was doing exactly what I'm saying they should not be doing. They were on their cell phone, and they were probably in some type of conversation with a friend or in a business situation. And the child was a 3-year-old toddler, and the child was in 2 feet of water and drowned. The parent did not know how to swim. And so by the time, the emergency services were there, they were not able to revive the child. And those are the kinds of things that happen more frequently than we would like for those things to happen. You can't multitask when you're a pool watcher. It is important that you are watching the child all the time. And in certain states, if that happens, that's negligence, and that could be prosecuted depending upon the situation, depending upon the prosecutor and the attorney district attorney programs that are in your state, your county, or your city. So multitasking is something that you cannot do. I have grandchildren. I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old grandson. When I'm sitting out there watching them swim, my eyes have to be peeled to them, because there are other things that kids do as well. They horseplay, the old expression, horseplaying, roughhousing. Those are the sort of things that we have to be careful of. We also have to be careful of these kids, trying to run around the pools or run around the beaches, because they can slip and fall, injure themselves, fall into the water and be unconscious. And so those are things that, we can talk about as we kind of go through this process, but there's a lot to do with pool safety as well as water safety in detail.
So the watcher needs to be a designated person, and they need to tag in, tag out if they're gonna go off to do other things. So somebody's always got to be
Yes.
watching.
Yes.
That's a high bar. You also mentioned about roughhousing. I've got two
Yeah.
boys, so you can imagine folks want to chase each other around pools, and I worry about them slipping and falling and injuring themselves, hitting their head especially.
Right.
I don't know exactly how to convey to them to not do that and make it seem like I'm not the bad guy all the time.
Well, I would rather be the bad guy than be the guy who has lost a child because they have slipped and hit their heads and injured themselves and potentially injured themselves in such a way that it could cost their lives. So as a lifeguard, as a former lifeguard, and as the father and the grandfather of children, who everyone in my family, all of my children and my grandchildren know how to swim. And so it's extremely important. It is a high bar, but we have to stay focused in those areas. It's extremely important. There is something that we're all probably familiar with that's called timeout. And so I would, timeout is something that we may have to do from time to time. If you are swimming in a municipal pool, then there are pool regulations that are posted on the that are posted in the pool area when you enter the pool area, and it tells you here are the rules of actually being in of safe swimming. And one of those is no roughhousing, no running around the pool, and you could be asked to sit outside of the pool for a specific amount of time, or you could actually be kicked out of the pool, during that time as well. So there are things there are rules and regulations that have to be utilized in order to maintain safety for all in swimming environments.
What you mentioned about learning how to swim. Is there about an age where you'd recommend the kids start learning how to swim? Is this something that they should do when they're teenagers? Should they do it younger? What would be the best recommendation from your perspective?
Good question, because it depends upon your situation. My toddler grandchildren know how to swim. They're 3 years old. It's a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, and so and that requires, of course, the parent being in the pool with them or a guardian being in the pool with them during that time. So really, as young as possible, where a young child and as safely as possible can learn how to swim. Because let's realize also that it's a part of water safety as well, not just learning how to swim, but it's a part of water safety. And the younger that you are, the more familiar you are with water, the less likely you will drown. Because if you know how to tread water, as an example, then that at least gives you some time, before you actually go under it and you're not able to retrieve yourself. But however, in most cases, you're going to find in municipal pools throughout the country that they are typically starting kids swimming around the ages of 6 to 7 years of age.
You mentioned about pools and sort of a backyard pool, but what if the pool's at the resort, is at the hotel, you're traveling for the summer, you go to the water park, and it's a much larger environment. Maybe they have lifeguards, but you mentioned the buddy system. It seems like it's really easy to lose track of kids in a large pool environment.
Right.
Can you talk more about what it means to have the buddy system in place?
Sure. The buddy system really means that you have someone with you at all times, that's swimming with you at all times, that is also a swimmer. They may not be the best swimmer, but they are at least someone that can make an adult aware that someone is in trouble. So if you're in trouble and you're a part of the buddy system, that there's the scream, there's the yell, help, help, help. And someone usually has the abilities to notice what's going on. And so as long as you have someone with you, preferably a competent swimmer like yourself, then you are at less risk of actually drowning. the buddy system has been around as long as I can remember. When I was a child, swimming in the pool and swimming in Upper Caney Lake out of North Louisiana and some of the other lakes, that the buddy system was mandatory. You checked in with a buddy and you checked out with a buddy. But as you indicated, there's some of these large resort type swimming pools, and a lot of those swimming pools don't have lifeguards. They have signs up that say swim at your own risk. Now when you go to the beaches, you'll find lifeguards with the buoys. So those things are helpful. But the reality of it is the buddy system has been a system that I know personally has worked for me, and it works for my grandkids. My 5-year-old and my 8-year-old grandsons know that when they go in the pool, they have to go into the pool with each other. They don't go alone, and they also have to wear the appropriate certified life-saving gear that they must wear, whether it's a life-saving water jacket or it's an appropriate floating. Those things enhance your abilities to stay afloat and to swim safely.
One of the other things I've always taught the kids is not to drink the water at the pool.
Yeah.
The idea that sometimes the water, I know it's chlorinated. I know that people try very hard to make sure that the pool water is safe. Brother Kenzie, do you ever see people come in with diarrheal illnesses in the summer because they've had bad food, bad water, and maybe even had the pool water?
Luckily, I've not had to treat anybody for bad pool ingested water. You do sometimes see people who have gone down to some of the beaches and some of the water that they drink in some of the coastal areas, and will sometimes come back with some types of diarrheal illnesses, and usually they're pretty benign. But luckily, in most pools, especially ones that are well maintained and keep appropriate pH levels and the appropriate chlorination levels, you don't too often see issues with gastrointestinal problems.
Another thing that I always worry about is if folks are at the pool all day, they bring food with them, and then they've got food, and you've got mayonnaise in the sandwich, and you've had it out all day with you at the picnic, at the pool, at the park, and so the pool and all these things seem to go together.
Well, that can be an issue. Obviously that's one of our almost board questions as emergency medicine when it comes to, a patient was at a picnic, there was potato salad or some type of mayonnaise holding food at the park, and it became very hot, and patient developed severe diarrheal gastroenteritis within 2 to 4 hours afterwards. So that's something you definitely need to be careful of. If you do go to a pool, if you do go to the beach, make sure that if you have some food, that you try your best to keep it in a location that is cool. So have it packed on ice, especially things that contain mayonnaise. They can definitely spoil pretty quickly, and though you may not be able to smell badness, the bacteria that's breeding on the inside can cause some pretty significant GI issues. Some so severe that patients will have to come to the ER for fluids and sometimes admission to the hospital.
Similarly, I've sometimes seen kids who aren't in the proper swim gear. Infants, particularly not in specified swim diapers. They might be in their regular clothes or regular diapers, and they're not quite bathroom trained yet. Those are things that I know that young parents sometimes make mistakes with, and older kids don't have trouble with. But somewhere in between, the young parents, particularly bringing their infants and their toddlers out the first time, may not necessarily be aware of wearing the right kinds of clothing, having the right kind of equipment for them.
And I completely know that from experience. I had no idea, because I didn't, growing up in Jackson, Mississippi, fairly impoverished area, we had a community pool, but there weren't really any small kids there. They were usually, I say small kids now, but This was usually once kids were in the middle school and high school. So usually, 15-year-old, able to swim on your own type of kids. But as I've had kids myself and who have what we call water days at school, the school sent home these lists of things that the kids must have on based on their age and their ability to control their bladders and bowels. And now I'm on Amazon shopping for swimming diapers and and things I never knew existed when I was a child. Like I didn't know that this was a thing. And then, but now they're very important because especially when you're just doing things like a small tub of water, which is not going to have chlorine in it. It's just going to be just water. You do run the risk of seeing things, bacterial type of illnesses or bacteria in this type of water that isn't going to be cleaned by some type of industrial detergent. So you have to be more vigilant about what you are wearing or what your children are wearing and how tight it fits and how it's going to protect their excretion from getting in the water and getting on other people.
Brother Tyson, what would you tell people about identifying someone who's in trouble in the water? How would you recognize that, and what would you do if you were around and somebody looked like they were in trouble?
Good question. Wow. I would say that there are several things to do, but certainly someone that's going under, that's bobbing in the water, their head is up and it's going down like this. Those are things to look for. Throwing their arms. Those are some very obvious things to look for. But some of the things are very subtle. As it looks, that's why it's important from a lifeguard perspective to pay attention, and for those adults that are watching kids to pay attention. So, if you see those things, the first thing to do is, of course, certainly if you're not a competent swimmer, is to yell out, scream out, help. There's somebody, point to the person, who is who you see is in trouble. The first thing is not to always jump in the water to go and save someone, even if you're a competent swimmer. There are apparatuses that should be around every pool area. There's a buoy that you should have there. The water safety, the pole, the cleaning pole is an example that you use to clean your pool water with. That's an apparatus that you can use to hand to a person if they're able to grab onto it, and then you can pull them to safety. Going near the side of the water, near the side of the pool is very important as well. So those are some of the things that you look for. The last thing is to immerse yourself in the water and go after someone, but that should be someone that's a competent swimmer. And of course, if they have one of the Coast Guard approved buoys that they carry with them, that the lifeguards have in beach water as well as in pool water, then they're able to utilize those devices to help bring that person out of the area where there is danger.
Obviously, if someone's in big trouble, you're going to be calling 911. Brother Kinsey, is there anything you'd want people in the community to know about how to perform CPR and what they should learn about drowning?
Yeah, I tell people all the time, CPR is one of those things that everyone should know how to perform. Because you never know when you're going to need it, whether it's at a pool, whether it's on a plane, whether it's at the gym. I've seen CPR have to be employed, not just in my emergency rooms, but in pretty much every location I go to. I've seen a person drop in a grocery store. I've seen a person getting CPR in an airport. I've seen it in multiple locations. And there are many organizations that offer free CPR classes. You just have to sign up and go and do it. If you search Google CPR classes in my area, there are lots and lots of places that will do CPR teaching for free. Some of them for a small fee, but it is an important skill to have, and you could potentially save someone's life.
We've heard a lot tonight about identifying the signs and symptoms of heat injury, some of the early things to do, some of the preventative things to do. Similarly, on the pool safety, I've heard a lot about things to learn, and if you're going to be around the water, in terms of swimming, in terms of CPR, in terms of the buddy system. Brother Sterling, I wanted to see if there are any other suggestions or other ideas that you have in your experience as an emergency room physician.
Just fantastic comments from everyone. I want to just continue to thank you for what it is you continue to do here. The common thread that has gone through the conversation, both in terms of heat-related illnesses and injuries and the pool safety conversations, is you need to develop a sense of mindfulness. Being exposed in these environments is fraught with danger and not without risk. Myself, a very, very long time ago, actually survived a potential drowning as a result, as was mentioned, by having a buoy nearby that was thrown to me and by having a stick handed to me. So that is what we always talk about: stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And in the example of heat-related illnesses, so many things can simply be avoided instead of having to address them on the front end. For example, we've all heard the stories of children and dogs being left in cars. No. Um, you know, these conversations are always meant to empower. And I just want to leave you with a couple of things that are meant to be things that you can remember. We've given you some amazing information tonight, but you may forget it. But hopefully there are some tips that we can offer you that you can remember. And in terms of the heat conversation, pardon me if this comes across a little bit crude to you, but one of the truisms that we discuss jokingly in an emergency department setting, you always have a captured audience when someone comes in with a heat-related illness, is that if you're outside, whether you're spending 5 hours playing golf or biking for 10 miles or doing some other strenuous activity, a lot of people think when it's hot outside, it's a great time to go jogging, for example. Well, in these situations, as Brother Kinsey mentioned, you can preload yourself with fluids, but over the course of spending a long period of time outside, if you're not urinating, you probably aren't drinking enough. So the point there is that keep that in mind if you don't remember anything else. If you are sweating and thirsty, or even if you don't feel thirsty, if your stomach can handle a little bit more fluid, go for it. That's the type of prevention that really will bode you well if you forget most of the other things that have been laid out for you. And one other point that is particularly salient is that just remember the life-threatening injuries that we describe as heat stroke correlate with a very simple thing that you can recognize, and that is some type of altered mental status. And that can range from confusion to blackout or any other such thing. But anytime someone who has been exposed to heat has any change in their mental status or becomes confused, unable to talk, etc., your first move is to call 911. Okay? Time is tissue, and you need to get where definitive care can be delivered. So yes, we want you to take off their clothes and to face ice wherever you can, and to remember, don't give them fluids if they are unconscious, because they can aspirate the fluid and that'll cause additional problems. But these are the types of simple things that we just want you to think about. Slow down, drink plenty of fluid regularly, limit intake of alcoholic beverages when you are outside, stay indoors as much as possible. So many different things that you can do here. So keep these small things in mind, empower yourselves, and be mindful. I hope you've enjoyed the conversation this evening, and we always welcome your questions. You can continue to post them on our Sphinx TV YouTube site or on the Facebook page, and we'll be happy to continue to monitor and get back to you. Join us again in 2 weeks where we'll be discussing travel considerations, since it's that time of year as well. And again, I want to thank Brother Tyson, Brother Kinsey, and of course our moderator, Deputy Surgeon General, Brother Narcisse, for an outstanding conversation this evening. And with that, I will bid you adieu and good night, and please be safe.